So Chris, we can get started. So everyone, so today we are going to discuss about the conventional commits. So Chris was leading this thread earlier. So this is towards like getting feedback from maintainers, whether they buy in, buy out on the proposal. So off to you, Chris.
Thanks, Bipin. Hi, everyone. Like Bipin said, it's not going to be a traditional presentation as such. Actually, I only have 2 slides, so it couldn't be even if I wanted to. I'm looking more to get feedback, constructive criticism, and hopefully a route forward for this conventional commits work. Oh, there we go. Okay, so hopefully everybody here is at least aware of what's going on with this conventional commits stuff. If you're not, I'll just give a quick brief reintroduction to what's been happening. So we did the v2.4 release recently. One of the things we noticed was that the amount of work going into it is increasing. This is actually something we noticed in the v2.3 release and before. So it's not new. It's only since the 2.4 release that we've decided to actually action anything. So really what we're looking to do is reduce some of the release workload that we do here at ARM predominantly. Releases are primarily done by ARM core maintainers just because that's the status quo. It was originally an ARM spawned project, and most external contributors are platform maintainers who really, let's be honest, are only interested in their own platform. So that lies to us. The 2.4 release saw quite a lot of the team moved onto the release effort full time. So this was not a part-time effort, but the primary effort was spent on getting the changelog up to date, or not effort so much as time. At one point, we actually had multiple people on the changelog trying to get that in by the deadline that we'd set for ourselves. It's a pretty big piece of work. So what we're aiming to do is just to minimize and redistribute some of the effort that we put into the changelog, mostly the changelog. Hopefully in the future, maybe we'll start considering other things we can do to minimize the work for release. But right now our focus is the changelog. Ideally, we'd like to spread the minimal amount of work possible across other contributors, just because extra bureaucracy is nobody's a fan of it. We have been planning to automate the changelog since, like I said, before the 2.3 release. It came up recently that some other projects across TF.org and actually in ARM OSS, some of that investigation work had already been done previously, and some projects do already have their own solutions implemented. I think Dan mentioned on the wiki that Embed TLS, for instance, has its own solution to this. But I'm TFA, and so the goals that I know of for TFA were to dramatically reduce the work required to maintain the changelog, and really to use something that was already out there, something that we didn't have to, reinvent the wheel for. That allows us to avoid maintenance on in-house tooling. The more in-house tooling we introduce, the more we have to teach people or newcomers, and the more external contributors need to learn. So we really wanted to avoid that. So if you're not aware of how we came to this conventional commits conclusion already, the wiki page has a presentation that I gave originally internally. It has had restricted stuff removed, but it's pretty much the same thing. And that details how we got to conventional commits and why we're using it, or rather why we want to use it. So the primary points are here. It's a well-defined specification. So it's explicitly intended to be machine readable, which is what matters for us with regards to getting this changelog work reduced. If we can look back at the commits and we can derive information that's useful to the changelog from those commits, then that's our ultimate goal. The other major reason was that it's actually already popular with existing open source projects. I couldn't name any specifically at the moment, but it's one of those things that people like to blog about. The other thing is that it doesn't assume anything about our environment. Some suggestions that people have already put forward were good. However, some of it relies on the environment. So some strategies rely on Git merge strategies, others rely on Git rebase strategies. Some of them, also actually quite the popular ones, rely on GitHub pull requests or a system like GitHub pull requests, where you have a change description on the pull request itself. For us, using Gerrit predominantly to merge things into upstream, that information just isn't available to us as much as I'd like it to be. The last point was just, it just has an entire ecosystem of software already out there. So it doesn't require any in-house tooling. It requires a little bit of configuration. If you've already had the chance to look at the patch stack that I put up on Gerrit to implement this, there are a couple of configuration files, but all things considered, it's pretty minor. It doesn't involve creating any new tools or any huge config files that we need to link up at all. So it's very, very simple. And if we need it, there are plenty of utility libraries that support this specification. Hopefully we can avoid that. But if we're looking at going for a more bespoke solution, then that's the way it would have to be. So I'm going to open the floor because I know that people registered some concerns. I won't address any of them directly from the wiki. If you'd like to voice a concern, now is probably the time to do it while I'm here to respond to them. So yeah, if anybody's got any questions or concerns, go ahead. No big deal. Okay, I'll pull them from the wiki then. Bear with me.
Okay, so I think the first question to sort out is whether the Git history has any other purpose than a changelog.
Yeah, I mean, oh, sorry, go on.
Oh, no, okay, I finished. Go on.
Yeah, one of the points that I brought up in our initial investigation internally was that if we willed it, we could use the breaking change metadata from these commits for identifying major release points. It's not on the roadmap, it's not planned, it was just an idea, less a proposal. But yes, you can use more of the commit metadata than what the changelog would use necessarily. That's probably not the only example, to be honest. It's just I didn't look into it directly.
Yeah, actually, I don't see a deep conflict. Maybe one issue which can be encountered in the future is that the Git history is quite static. So if basically changelog entries, we might want to have more flexible. So when you actually write the changelog for a release and you realize an error in the Git history, then you cannot really fix that. And this might be an issue.
Yes, that's true. Although I think the tools that are out there don't necessarily recreate the changelog over and over. I think they take the changelog that exists and then append or prepend to it. But yeah, I mean, if it is the case that they overwrite the changelog, then it might become a problem. I mean, it's the obvious downside to adopting something like this is that you no longer have a human writable changelog. If you want something that better represents how a human would write it, then this is not the way to go. However, the only alternative there is to request that every contributor update the changelog themselves. We have no real way to enforce that, unfortunately. So it's all trade-offs. Okay, anybody else?
Just a quick question, probably not a concern. So I'm just going through this conventional commit page, right? So it follows this template of whether it's a fix or doc or refactor or something like that, right? But previously in TFA, we used to follow the convention, like we put in the module or the specific scopes as a first thing, and then followed by the subject of the commit, right? Let's say if I'm adding a new feature into, let's say, Platarm board. So how should we have the initial description, whether it's an ad or something like that, right? And followed by this scope of this commit, Platarm board. So that would take up a huge subject characters, right? Usually it is limited to 72 characters. How are we going to handle that?
I mean, whether it takes up a huge amount of space is kind of down to which tooling you use to read the commit log. And I would not say it uses a huge amount of space unless you're placing a restriction on the length of the subject, realistically. The restriction we've put on at the moment in the commits, in the changes to implement this are 50 characters. I am of two minds whether that's enough. I'm pretty sure it's not. And I know that some of you have already voiced the opinion that it isn't. But there's nothing actually stopping us from increasing that if we need to.
Right.
I mean, we can downgrade that to a warning as has already been proposed elsewhere, in which case you just get a warning about the extra length used, and it doesn't prevent anything.
Okay.
Yeah, in which case the only limitation on how you format your commit is based on this tag, essentially. And in that situation, the only additional stuff that you've got in there is just, feet or fix or whatever, which is kind of the information that we actually need. So, yeah.
Right. Got it. Yeah. So I think the maximum extra characters could be around 10 for the refactor. Rest all are small. Okay. Thanks.
So I'm not sure if it is a good idea to have these module-based tags in the commit message, because the granularity of these tags is different than the granularity of the changes. So, for example, if you try to upstream a change which affects multiple modules, then what would be the tag?
Yeah.
So,
sorry.
Yeah. Ideally, logically, it has to be split up into multiple commit, but the point is valid. If it is going to affect multiple commits, the module tag should be something like top level directory followed by a star or something, which indicates that it's going to affect multiple modules.
I think generally the scope is intended to document the name of the part, I suppose, the component, rather than the general path. And I think most projects, at least when I looked at Angular's, they've split up their components into actual named pieces. I can't remember the examples right now, but rather, if you have a change to a particular platform module or particular platform source file, the platform is the logical component there. You might have a more granular view on it in terms of what the change is actually doing, but what's important is that it gets documented under the platform changes, because if anybody needs to know the path to the change that you've made, they can always look at the changes in the commit itself. So I think the important information is what is the logical scope rather than what is the physical scope on the file system. Hopefully that reduces the amount of space that you use in the commit message as well, but remains to be seen. You could, of course, omit it altogether if you're making changes to generic code, for example.
A question? Hey, Varun Wadekar from NVIDIA. So I have a question related to the tooling. I just wanted to understand, is there a limitation of the tools that they can read these tags only from the subject header, or can they also read it from the actual commit message body?
Yeah, they must come from the subject header. Yeah, they're not flexible enough to handle, because the conventional commit specification defines that it exists in the header itself and that it can't exist in the body. And that's what the tools stick to.
Because even I have a concern that we lose out on precious real estate in the subject header with these tags. And I mean, there are some compromises, but then you don't want the subject header to be more than 80 lines and just keep on going. Visually, it's going to be.
Yeah, I think the general advice is to try and keep the subject as short as possible anyway. If you have to go over that, then I don't think it's necessarily a problem. I mean, there are some situations where just describing what the change fundamentally is doing, it's going to take more than 50 characters, just virtually what it might be doing. But at least I think looking at the kernel project specifically, I think most of the commits landed at around 50 characters anyway. But there are, of course, exceptions. There are some that are shorter than that, and there are some that are much longer than that. It's not necessarily that we want to reject those. We just want to discourage them if we can.
Right, and that's the main reason I'm not comfortable adding more tags that we cannot remove. That is something that we have to mandatorily add in the subject header. So we lose out on that space.
Yes, you lose out on the space, but in the end, there's no actual restriction on the space that you do use. So we're not, I don't think at this point we're planning on enforcing a particular limit. It's just that we want to encourage people to use as little space as you can. If you don't want to, we won't stop you. It's just that those are the guidelines from the official Git, or at least Linus's Git documentation. So there's no technical reason to restrict it to that limit. It's more just, it's kind of like code style in that sense. Okay, anybody else? Okay, so I'm just going to quickly look through the wiki and see what else people have put on there.
Would you mind summarizing what the takeaway is? There are a lot of opinions. So is this something we're going to do? Is this something we're going to go ahead with, or?
It's kind of down to how this particular forum plays out. I mean, if people are really, really unhappy about adopting this, then perhaps we'll have to take second considerations. But at this point for us, it's kind of, we need something. The workload for getting these releases done and getting this changelog updated has become particularly prohibitive. And if there are no major rejections or buyouts in this case from maintainers, then I think we will go ahead and adopt it, just purely because we can't sit around forever.
Right. So I suppose you should make the wiki page say that, either we need to have an alternative, or, this seems like the most likely direction, right? So it sounds like what you're saying is no solution is not an option.
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, if there's no solution proposed in this meeting, then we will adopt this. I mean, past this point, this is the final, if you will, the final chance to provide alternatives if you have any. Otherwise, if not, then we will go ahead.
Yep, makes sense. Thank you.
On that note, does anybody have any alternatives they want to propose?
So I don't have an alternative as such, but how are we planning to transition to this thing? Do we have a CI check which will do a commit message check and then say that you are not following the conventional commit, something like that in the TFA CI?
Pretty much, yeah. So the plan is that at first, probably until the next release, we will not enforce this for non-ARM contributors, so at ARM.com contributors. For those ARM contributors, we're expecting to enforce it as soon as we can, once those changes have been reviewed. In which case, patches that don't, sorry, I've forgotten the word, don't match the specification, those will be rejected at the CI level.
Well, so a question, right? So what does that mean for your release notes, right? So if I understand correctly, one of the main reasons is to automate release notes. So if a platform does not follow it, does that mean they just simply won't show up in the release notes? Or is the platform maintainer going to have to do the manual work to give you the list of changes?
For the next release, the plan is to maintain the current status quo, other than for ARM employees. We will still have to go through these commits manually until the release after. But the process itself for generating or getting this changelog going won't be changed until at least the next release. So for the v2.5 release, the changelog will be manually updated just as it was for the v2.4 and v2.3 releases.
Right.
It's our hope for the v2.6 release that we'll have something that can generate that.
Right. So I guess my question was for v2.6, right? So since you're saying you won't enforce it for other platforms, what does that mean for the release notes? Are you saying things that follow conventional commits would be in the release log and the rest won't? Or have you thought about that?
No, so traditionally when we're updating the changelog, we have somebody go through the Git history from the previous release and rewrite those commit messages in a way that matches how we'd expect the changelog to look. It's at their discretion whether they omit the change from the changelog or whether they reword it or anything like that. If changes going into the v2.5 release don't adhere to the specification, that's not a problem because they will still undergo this human maintenance. They still need to be human read and placed into the changelog, so they won't be omitted. The only change is that we're going to try and get ARM employees used to this as soon as possible and give platform maintainers a time period to sort of see how it looks from the outside in a sense. And then once the 2.5 release comes on, we'll flip the switch and it'll apply to everybody.
Okay, yeah, okay. Okay, that's what I was looking for. So after 2.5, you are saying, yeah, you will flip the switch and everybody shall follow it.
Exactly, yes.
Okay, thanks.
So what other options have you evaluated other than conventional commits? Dan pointed out some other, I think Embed TLS project has their own way of doing this. So have you evaluated that?
No, the only solution we've evaluated is conventional commits, just because it was the one that we have people familiar with. Is Dan on the call? Dan's not here to speak about how that goes on the Embed TLS project. No, I don't think any of us actually were aware that Embed TLS has their own scheme for this, but one of the counterpoints for the Embed TLS approach was that they do maintain their own in-house tooling for that, which is something we wanted to avoid.
Right, because one of the other intentions of this was to also unify the strategy for all the projects under trusted firmware.
Yeah, that's right. I was hoping, and I think we're expecting more tech leads from ARM, but yeah, Dan doesn't appear to be here. We have people from TFM. Georgia, I don't know if you had some investigation into this, or I'm not sure, but from the TFA perspective, the solution was conventional commits, just because it was the most obvious approach. We didn't want to do anything in-house, and as far as I know, there aren't any other open source proposals as it is.
Because I just, one of the statements that you said was a little concerning to me when you said that this is the last option, take it or leave it. And we definitely need more discussions on this. So I wouldn't want this to be the last discussion. I understand this is a problem and we need to solve it, but we need to brainstorm and come up with and see that everybody, or if there are other options available there, we should try to evaluate them before moving on with something.
I mean, the primary problem we're having is that we want to find an alternative if we can. Our preferred solution is conventional commits, but until somebody comes up with an alternative they're willing to propose, there's not much more we can do but wait. And at this point, I think it's getting
so
difficult.
Chris, I think one of the problems is, so if I look at the email, right, yeah, I believe at least on the TFA email list, we got notification of this on 2/11, right? That's about 2 weeks. And I think I have to agree with Varun here, right? That's too short of a time for anybody to research, go at least, I don't want to speak for Varun, but I would think for us 2 weeks is probably too short of a time to say we've had enough time to evaluate other options and, even get agreement internally, right?
Okay, that's fair enough.
So,
yes.
So if, yeah, suppose if there is another 4, I don't know how many weeks, Varun, maybe you have a better idea of it. If you get more time, yeah, maybe we can come up with an alternative or something like that.
So Chris,
Okay.
you mentioned it will be only for the internal till v2.5, right?
That's right, yes.
So I think is that a time that others can actually look to evaluate and then come back, or?
That's more the evaluation period for, well, more the implementation period for Arm
Okay.
internally.
Okay.
If we want an evaluation period for alternatives before that, we can't flip that switch
Okay.
until that's over. Yeah, so we're in a situation now where we need to gather as much feedback as possible. We need any alternative proposals as soon as possible. We can extend the deadline for that if we say end of next month. By that point, if nobody has given us an alternative we can utilize, then I don't think we have a whole lot of choice but to adopt this. But yes, I mean, the situation is we need this as quickly as possible. If there aren't alternatives, this is what will be adopted. And if there are alternatives, then we need some extra effort from the proposers of that to evaluate that and to make sure that that's, you know, that addresses our concerns as well.
So I mean, just to add, I really like the conventional commits idea and you know what they are trying to do. I just have concern of losing space in subject header. So one way that I proposed was maybe adding some metadata to the commit message body itself. So I know there will be it will be a little bit of a deviation, but I think if we have to look at all other projects and come up with something that works for everybody, then maybe we should also think of a hybrid approach where we pull things from different projects and then, you know, make something that at least, if not 100%, but covers 70% of the base, something of that sort. Instead of just saying that you know, we will only look at something that is out there, no hybrid approaches. I think we need more flexibility there.
I mean, at the moment, the problem we have is that we can't expend a whole lot of effort on these additional build system tools. We need something low maintenance, and like I said, ideally something that's already out there, purely because any deviation from that involves generally not a small amount of effort to get it up and going, and then also document it and maintain it. The reason we went with conventional commits is precisely because it's already out there. We don't have to do anything bar configure it to get it going. And we don't have to maintain anything other than configurations for those tools. I understand that certain contributors have problems with it being too rigid. But to be honest, ultimately the work will fall on us to support that solution. And at the moment we can't spare a whole lot.
Right. I mean, it's a one-time effort that you have to put in anyway. So you're saying that even that first one-time effort or the one-time effort you want to, I mean, once you automate everything, it's going to be easier for all of us. So that one-time effort has to be put in.
It's not necessarily a one-time effort, though. That's the thing. Somebody's got to document it and maintain it if any changes come along, and somebody's got to explain to the people that come along how it works and why as well, why it works the way it does. Yeah, I mean, it was quite explicit that we did want to avoid any additional effort past this one point. The work that we've got for conventional commits is already up on Gerrit, so the implementation is done. And I recognize that people think that it's one-time effort, so why don't we just do it? But officially, you know, I'm on this now, but I'm already having to juggle other tasks. So though that one-time effort for me is a lot of extra work that I have to do alongside more prominent work. So it's not as easy as just justifying it as a one-time thing as such. And it's also something we have to have done ideally before the next release, or at least, you know, a complete proposal before the next release.
So would it be possible to check the embed TLS implementation? Because it is already working and out there. So at least it might be worth to check whether it is working for TFA.
Yeah, I mean, we could have a look. Unfortunately, Dan's not here. And I think it was Dan that mentioned that they have an existing solution. So it's something we'll have to go off and investigate ourselves at some point, I think.
Sorry,
so
go ahead.
thank you. So then I was checking that one and I didn't go into the details or checked it thoroughly, but they seem to have a dedicated file for this, and they update that one, and their tooling is basically processing that instead of the Git history. So I think that is the main difference.
Right, I see. Okay.
But I don't know. So there can be a lot of details which making it non-working for TF.org or TFA or other projects. I don't know.
Yeah, I'll have to. I took a brief look, but I didn't get to find the build scripts that they were using.
So one other question I have is, so when you say TFA project, does that include Hafnium and the secure services repository as well?
At the moment, it's exclusively the TFA project, but it would, I presume, eventually be extended to those projects. It's up to those individual project maintainers to decide on that.
Yeah, I think we need to extend it quickly, at least to the other two, right? Because they're closely interrelated, and the tendency is that people will use those three repositories together. So
yeah, that's the hope, and that's the expectation. I think is that eventually it will be extended to those. But like I said, it's not my call to make, I'm afraid.
Okay.
Yeah. So for trusted services, we plan to adapt as quickly as we can.
So which approach, the embed TLS approach or this one?
Independent. So which one is selected for TF.org? So basically, I think the decision is what should be the methodology for TF.org.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Yeah, unfortunately, the work for this has been isolated across teams. So actually, it was only recently that we realized there was some overlap between the projects. And only very recently, I think within the past 2 weeks, that we decided that it would make sense to extend this past TFA. So it's all come together pretty quickly.
Yes, and I think this conventional commit has the additional benefit to have a framework to handle Git hooks, which could have some additional benefits.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. The tooling that we've chosen to use to implement this, when you install it, it automatically installs those tools. So I don't know if any of you are familiar with Node.js, but if you have Node.js installed, which it's pretty easy to do if you're on a modern OS, it's a case of just entering the TFA directory and running npm install, and you have nothing else to do from that point. That installs the Git hooks for linting, for installing the committers and hook as well. And then that verification happens locally as well. So it just speeds up the development process. I don't know whether that's the case for the embed TLS approach. I don't think so.
Famous last words.
Well, I've been using the tools locally for some time, and to be honest, I think they're pretty high quality. I haven't had any issues with it.
Yeah, even from Git Bash.
What's that, sorry?
Even from Windows, from Git Bash or cmd.exe or.
Yeah, I've not had any problems with OS compatibility. I know you use Linux, well, Ubuntu, Windows, and Mac OS at this point.
Please, quick question.
Yep.
Yeah. First of all, yeah, I really like the conventional commits approach. My question was, yeah, we're suggesting the use of multiple tools like commit.zen, commitlint to create the subject and topic as part of the commit message, right? Is it also possible to do everything manually?
Yes, of course. If you just avoid installing those tools, then that's not a problem at all. You can completely skip running any of those.
Okay.
So yeah, this was one of the aims actually, was to minimize the amount of work that we had to do, or contributors had to do locally. If you're happy to format your commit messages the way you do today, then it's not a problem.
So the tool is helping us to populate the types and the topics, right? Like build, chore, whatever, the feature, fix, and all. Is it also possible to add more of such tags?
Yes, yeah, we have complete flexibility. As I understand it, if I remember correctly, there is some flexibility on the tags. The scopes have full flexibility, and I think there are additional tools out there if you want to take it a bit more custom. Although it's still pretty rigid, it still has to, adhere to the spec. But
so are the tools themselves version tracked? How would
sorry,
we?
how do you mean?
So do we actually do a source control version for the tools themselves?
We have, so in the Gerrit packages, you'll see a package.json file. If you're writing a JavaScript or a Node.js program, that would describe your project as a whole. But for us, because we're only putting in tools, all it does is describe the development dependencies that we have.
Okay.
So that tells NPM which packages to install. Those get installed locally if you've got concerns about global packages. So those get installed directly into the repository, and their versions are pinned according to our package.json file.
Okay. So by updating the JSON file, we are just updating the tools version.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah.
Okay, so that helps us with the version control.
Yeah, so you don't need to install any of these tools yourself or manually.
Okay. Yeah, that's all. Thank you.
Thanks.
Another suggestion would be like we can have a commit template as a hook or something like that, so that if someone is doing the commit manually, the comment section will have all these tags listed during when they are creating a commit.
Yeah, I think we can do that. I think Git has
if they opt to not to use the tools and all.
Yeah, I think Git actually has support for like a template commit. I couldn't tell you how to set it up. I don't use it, but yeah, I think I don't know if you can set it up to load it by default or something. I'm not entirely sure. And I don't know if we can configure that through our hooks. We might be able to. It's just because it lives in the .git directory, which we don't have direct control over. And the hooks tool that we use only touches the hooks directory. So you'd have to look into that independently, I think.
Right, okay.
Anything else?
So Chris, follow up from Madhu's question. So if once the tool is integrated, still the output file is can be updated manually as well as by the automated tool.
Yeah, I think this is what Georgie asked earlier about going back and modifying the changelog. I'm not sure. It depends on the tool you use. I think the tool that we were looking at generating the changelog just prepends to the changelog file. So it shouldn't overwrite the whole file. In which case, if you need to, you can go back and make modifications, I believe.
And the manual change might end up diverging from what is proposed. Is that a concern?
Sorry, I don't understand.
No, the manual updates may not follow the convention. So how will we address that if that happens?
I mean, that's not a problem, because the conventional commits, the metadata that goes into that is what is used to separate those changes out in the changelog rather than as the actual formatting. So what should happen is, for instance, if you have a commit prefixed with fix, that should be put under the bug fixes section in the changelog.
Okay.
I don't think it includes the actual fix prefix. If it does, it's not too big a deal. But I don't think it's a problem if people are willing to humanize the changelog to make it more clear. I don't think that should be an issue.
Okay.
Yeah, really the only reason we want this specification is because it's the only way that I'm aware of that gives us enough metadata in the commits, or well, in general, really, about changes that are going into the repository. So yeah, if we had another way, if, for instance, a lot of projects use GitHub pull request information, So when you merge your GitHub pull request, it pulls the description and puts that in the changelog. But because we're using Gerrit, we don't have that sort of information available to us. The closest we have is the commit subject, really, unless people are willing to update the changelog themselves.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, Chris, I have one question regarding the tags you mentioned. So you told like we should have some generic tags like fix, feature kind of things. If you see currently our changelog, what we are generating manually, not generating, we are creating manually basically. So we are putting the library section, driver section, and we are putting all the logs over there. So can we achieve the same thing using this automation? Maybe you have covered it, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, although I'm not entirely sure on how to split that out in the changelog with the changelog generation tools. I know you can. I've seen some projects do it. Just briefly, so the commit tag, as we understand it today, is split up into two parts. You've got the type, which is, you know, fix or build, feature, whatever, and then you've got the scope. And what we usually use at the tag today is the scope. That's generally how we partition changes in the changelog based on the scope. And I expect there's probably a way with these changelog generation tools to split it out in the changelog as well. It just becomes a kind of a configuration thing because you need to start mapping these keywords in the commits to, you know, titles in the changelog. So, but I'm pretty sure there's a way to do it. I just haven't experimented with it.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, any more queries?
Hey, Chris, so from the wiki page, there was another suggestion from Jens to add the tags at the end of the subject header. So is that possible with the current tooling?
No, if it deviates from the conventional commit specification, then the tools can't handle it. You would have to do something entirely bespoke. In that case, you'd have to maintain in-house tooling to do that. I think the benefit of this approach, though, is that it's not too different from what we do today. That we currently prefix the scope to most commits, if not all. The only thing we miss out on is the type. And there might be tools to maybe pull that type from something else, some other part of the commit. But if there is, I wasn't aware of it, and the tooling around it is not quite as adopted, well known, I suppose. Okay, anything else?
Okay. So if you're done, any more questions? Otherwise, we'll call it done.
Can anyone summarize the way forward? I don't. It's not clear to me what we want to do in the future, or you know what our plan is.
So I think probably what we're going to have to do, judging by people's reactions to the timescale, is to extend the deadline for this. Probably, I would probably propose end of March. I think a month is probably enough time to give people some thinking room. Is anybody happy with that? Just to evaluate additional alternatives.
Yeah, and in addition, I think we should also be open to the idea of deviating a little bit from the conventional commits approach. I mean, that should also be an open option.
Yeah, I think it's an open option. The only thing is that we need to prove that it's viable. If it involves writing tools from scratch, then it's going to be a bit of a problem for us.
I mean, still using conventional commits, but making some or allowing some flexibility in the conventional commits approach itself. So, you know, for example, moving the tag somewhere else, or as Jens was suggesting, maybe at the end, or, you know, I understand that's a deviation, but I think we are still on the path of conventional commits, but with a slight deviation, I would say.
Yeah, the only reason I bring up what I did is because the tools that we use currently to parse the commits, we have nothing to do with them. They're not written by us. We don't maintain them. If we want to deviate from the spec, it means either taking these tools and adjusting them manually. And to be honest, I'm not that familiar with the JavaScript, so that'd have to be on somebody else. Or writing them ourselves with our own parsers. I would suggest that that's something we want to avoid, but it's up to the conclusion we come to.
Sorry, another thing that I gathered from this, just my observation, is that time is limited because you're doing this as a not a full-time work, and so maybe it's also prudent to ask if somebody from the community would like to share the workload. Maybe that will help, and we can also evaluate maybe on the evaluation side or making custom changes if somebody proposes something.
Absolutely, yeah. I encourage people to get involved in this. If you have a solution that you think is better than this, then go ahead, propose it. And if you can implement something, that we'd really appreciate that. Just because at the moment we can't spare too much work on this. So any community contribution is absolutely appreciated. Okay, so if everybody is happy with leaving the deadline to end of March, I think that's what we'll do. We'll give people time to evaluate alternatives. If necessary, give a shot at implementing them. If we can't get a consensus on this, then I think we will settle on conventional commits, just because it's familiar to most people that have adopted some sort of commit specification before. And otherwise we will try and work out an alternative if everybody's happy with that.
So Chris, will you be looking into the embed TLS also, as Georgie mentioned?
Yeah, I can look into it, though. Yeah. Probably not for a little while, actually, recently. But I mean, it's going to take more than me, because for me personally, I'm settled on conventional commits, and I recognize that others have got different viewpoints. So if I go to the embed TLS approach and I say I prefer this one, then it's only one set of eyes on this. So if we can get 2-3 more people looking at the embed TLS approach and giving their feedback on it, then we can get a clearer picture of where the community wants to go with this.
Okay, I just wanted to say thank you, Chris, and the TFA team for investing all the efforts into this tooling.
Thanks very much, Georgie. Appreciated. Okay, if everybody's happy with the route forward, then we'll call it here.
Yeah, thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.